Hello everyone. My name is Elisa. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We're here to go over my May wrap up. I'm excited to do it because there were lots of good books in May, with the exception of one, which we will get into. And I read 7 books this month, so we're going to be talking about 7 books. That is lower than I normally read. That is for reasons that I might talk about at the end really briefly. Yeah, it's just going to be a short, quick, sharp wrap up. We love to see it. So let's go ahead and get into the books. Like always, we're going to talk about them in the order that I read them. So from the books I read earliest in the month to the books I read most recently. And let's go ahead and dive right in. The first book that I read is House of Cotton. This is by Monica Brashears and it's published by Flatiron Books. Now, I've started this trend where in the beginning of the month, I read a bunch of library books, and then at the end of the month, I read a bunch of books off my physical TBR because I realize I'm not going to meet my goals of reading the same amount of books off my TBR that have come in. And then I always am panic reading a bunch of books off my TBR. So I definitely did that again. This is a library book, Hello, House of Cotton. And this was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. Flashback to the video where I had this in my most anticipated releases and said it was going to be one of the biggest releases of the year. Yeah, don't listen to her. She was young and naive. I did not like this book. This is the one book that I really didn't like this month. And it was just rough. Also, my grass is getting mowed. So if you hear that, my deepest apologies. But it really needs to be mowed. So there's that. So this book is following a young woman, maybe. I want to say she's around 18 or something like that. And she has just lost her grandmother. And her grandmother was really the person that took care of her. She was living with her grandmother and has a predatory landlord that is now doing bad things, that she doesn't have a guardian. So she's dealing with that. You also know from the blurb that she starts seeing her grandmother's ghost. So that's not a surprise. It happens from the get-go, but she does start seeing her grandmother's ghost. So there's that speculative element to it. And then the other part of the plot line is she's working at a gas station, and one day this kind of strange wealthy man walks in and offers her a modeling job. But the modeling job is strange and there are increasingly weird requests being made from her. That's the setup. I will say this is tackling themes of class, of race. It's trying to show the cycles of poverty and stuff like that, which is why I was very interested in it, but I just don't feel like they were executed well. I felt like it was pretty heavy-handed and not in a good way. I don't know what a good way would be exactly, but it was just so heavy-handed and so unbelievable. She was making the dumbest decisions. And I can handle that a little bit to make things seem realistic and they're a complicated character and all that. But every decision she was making was just girl, you're being so naive right now. Why are you doing this? And I just found that frustrating. And this is a pretty long book. So to have that for over 400 pages was just not it for me. I also thought that the speculative elements with the ghost felt pretty out of place. They ultimately didn't make a ton of sense. I wasn't sure if they were trying to pull in folklore elements. It was a little bit like that. There was a little bit of talking in riddles and stuff like that, but it didn't work for me. So I think this might work for some other people. It just was not a book for me. I found the main character really hard to follow for that length of pages, and the plot not interesting enough, which is hard to say because this is a weird book, but I just didn't find it captivating or engaging for me. That's House of Cotton. Who knows? Who knows? The next book that I read in the month of May is Couplets, a love story, and this is by Maggie Millner, and it's published by FSG. This is poetry, or it's kind of a novel in verse, I would say, very short. And this is all about a woman's relationship that is not the best in some ways, and also her relationship to herself and sort of feeling lost and coming undone. That is not original or new by any means, but I really love engaging with those types of stories. So I definitely liked this. I thought that it was such a good representation of kind of that era of your life where you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but you should know what you're doing. And you're in an all-consuming kind of love affair with someone that isn't necessarily the right person for you, and how hard it is to sort of find your way through that. So I thought it was a great depiction of that. It's another one to add to all the other ones out there. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend. I do think the writing is really well done in this. So that is Couplets by Maggie Millner. And the last library book that I read was one of my favorites of the month, and that is The Thick Malene by Hannah Porter. This one's published by Galley or Saga Press. And this was another one of my most anticipated releases for the year, but this one actually slapped, so that's good. This has a very interesting premise, and it follows two women. It starts following them when they're young girls, and then you see them into adulthood, or young adulthood, I should say. And one storyline is in this really pristine, sort of like gated, wealthy community that is very cult-like, honestly. They are not allowed to show like hunger or eat for enjoyment. So they eat very, very basic, bland foods only. And most of them take supplements in order to not have to eat at all. And they think that that will bring you closer to God, basically. And interestingly, this is sort of getting compared to purity culture that I think happens most prominently in like the fundamentalist Christianity that we see in the US a lot, because the society is hypersexual. Even from a young age, you're really encouraged to have a lot of sex and explore your body, in comparison to not being able to feed or nourish your body or get any enjoyment out of food. So it's sort of playing those off of each other in some ways, and I thought that was very fascinating and well done. The other storyline is following a young girl who is growing up in a poor area of this fictional world, and she gets a scholarship to a really prestigious tech school. And it's about her journey going there and what happens. And there's a lot of tokenism, there's a lot of exploitation that's happening there, and you get to see that play out. The way that these two storylines come together in the end was fascinating. I thought it was very well done. And both of these characters were just so intriguing to follow. I wanted to hear more about both of their stories. Even though they aren't always likable characters, they're very complicated, sometimes not likable characters, but I really enjoyed them and felt like they were fully fleshed out and very interesting and played on all the themes that the author was trying to play on. I really think this book was very clever. I would highly recommend it. It's talking about class, it's talking about race, it's talking about womanhood, it's talking about disordered eating, and it's talking about purity culture, like so many things that I enjoy reading about, and held really well. So very much enjoyed this, would highly recommend. That is The Thick Malene. I haven't read The Seep, so I can't compare it to that, but this does very much intrigue me to read The Seep, so I will try and pick that up at some point in the future. All right, now we're moving into the physical books that I read for the month. So the first one that I picked up was Little Eyes. This is by Samanta Schweblin, and it's translated from the Spanish by McDowell. This is published by Riverhead. I did not really understand what this was going into it, so I knew this was classified as horror. It's definitely social horror, so it's not going to be scary at all if you're worried about that. But it's a somewhat futuristic society. It's basically our current society, but there's just the existence of these things called Kentuckys, and they're almost like Furbies, like picture a Furby, but they're in all different animals, and they roll around on wheels, and the eyes have cameras in them. And you can choose to buy them. They're not like forced upon anyone. So you can either buy a Kentucky and have the Kentucky watch you, or you can be a controller, a handler of a Kentucky and watch someone else. There's this interesting discussion around the people who want to be watched and the people who want to be watchers, and the differences between them and why you would choose to be one or the other. That was really interesting. But most of all, I think the unsettling part of this is showing the ugly side of humanity when you're being watched 24/7. Like, everyone does things they're not proud of. Everyone, isn't their best selves all of the time. And what happens when people see those moments? And it shows many different perspectives of people that are both watchers and being watched. And yeah, it can get pretty bad. So there's many storylines, lots of perspectives. I enjoyed that you got a lot of perspectives. I do think that some perspectives were more interesting than others, and this wasn't a perfect book by any means. There's lots of unlikable characters in this, so know that going in, but overall, definitely worth the read, I would say. So that is Little Eyes. Next up, we have a graphic novel, and that is Papaya Salad. This is written by Elisa Macellari, and it's translated from the Italian by Carla Roncalli di Montorio. And this is published by Dark Horse. The author says that this is based off of her great uncle's real life experience, but she has novelized this, simply recreated it from journals that she found. So it's classified as a graphic novel, even though it's based on true events. And her father was Thai. She herself is Thai Italian. And he was in Italy on a military scholarship at the time that World War II broke out. I had never read a perspective of someone in Italy at the time that the war was breaking out. He also, because he's Thai, and of course, racism at the time, he gets bundled up with lots of other Asian cultures, East Asian specifically, and a lot of people are worried that he's Japanese. He at one point becomes a prisoner of war, and there's a storyline about that. So there are, I would say, trigger warnings going into this, but the tone overall is optimistic, and that kind of balances it out in some ways. But yeah, I thought this was fantastic. I highly encourage lots of people to pick this up. And the art style looks like this. It's in full color. I really loved the art. This was fantastic. I think lots more people should read it because it's a perspective that, at least for myself, I haven't seen a lot about. So yeah, that is this one. Next up, we have, probably tied with the Thick Malene for my other favorite book of the month, and that is Saint X. This is by Alexis Schaitkin, and it's published by Celadon Books. I think this is promoted as a literary thriller, and that is definitely what it is. Now they're weed whacking, if you can hear that in the back. But this, I think, is for lovers of White Lotus. I think that there's so many similarities around this. One, it involves a death at a very fancy resort, and it's talking about class and race, and it's a bunch of rich people on the resort interacting with the locals who work and live there, basically being unlikable. And then it also is very clever in the way that it manipulates some of those themes. The premise of this is there's a family on Saint X, which is a resort island, and their eldest daughter, they have two daughters, goes missing at the end of their trip, and then her body is found. Then we flash forward, and the younger sister, whose name is Claire, is now living in New York. She's graduated from college, and she's going by a different name. I want to say she's going by her middle name, but I can't remember what that is. And she runs into, by happenstance, one of the men that was originally suspected in the death of her sister. And that sort of propels her in this series of events of getting lost back in the case of Allison, who was her sister. That's the premise. It's a really fascinating premise. You get flashbacks throughout the entire novel, and I thought those were really well done. Okay, they finally stopped leaf blowing right outside my door, so who knows what you heard, but we're back. So yeah, I thought this was really well done. I think it's very clever. And I think it was handled very well, like all the bits and pieces of the plot and the way that they put it all together. So highly encourage people to pick this up if they haven't already. And yeah, thought it was fantastic, very page turning, couldn't put it down. So that is Saint X. Last but not least, and the leaf blowing has started again, but hopefully it's far enough away that you can't hear it, is The Employees by Olga Ravn. This is translated from the Danish by Martin Aitken, and it's published by New Directions. So this was just in my June TBR, but I did mention in that video that I might pick it up at the very end of the month, and I did, and I finished it very quickly. So I finished this in the last 2 days of the month. You could finish this in one sitting. It's very short and easy to read. This is told all in statements, so they look like that. Some are very short, and then some are like multiple pages. This follows the crew of the 6,000 ship, and it's following basically their workplace productivity. So they're having to give statements daily about the ship and life on the ship and their jobs. And there are humans and humanoids. And then there are also these objects that are sort of like otherworldly. And yeah, it's all about workplace culture of basically this rise of productivity and productivity above all else, even at the expense of your well-being. It's also about the introduction of AI into the workplace, and it's all very fascinating. Do you always know what's happening? No. Is it still interesting to read anyway? Yes. So I would definitely encourage you to pick this up. It's so short if that sounds like themes that are interesting to you, because yeah, it was very fascinating. It wasn't like the best thing I ever read, but I definitely am excited that I read it and it was worthwhile. So that is The Employees by Olga Ravn. So those are the 7 books that I read in the month of May. As I alluded to at the beginning of this video, you may have noticed that my And Other Stories books are not included here. That is because some things happened in the month of May in my personal life, and not only did that take up a lot of my free time for a couple of weeks, so I wasn't able to read as much, hence why this book wrap up is just smaller than it normally is. But also I was not in the headspace to be able to read heavy and or pessimistic in tone books. I just couldn't handle that at the time. And some of those books were that. The video is halfway done. I'm like halfway through the books. So it's still happening, but it will probably come out in July because I have other videos scheduled for June. So know that that is still coming out. But yeah, if you are wondering why they're not here, that's why. If you have read any of these books, please let me know what you thought about them below, and let me know what you read in the month of May, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.